Στη διάρκεια ενός έγκριτου συνεδρίου, ένας δισεκατομμυριούχος καθηγητής προκαλεί το ακροατήριο με μια αδύνατη εξίσωση και χλευάζει ένα φτωχό αγόρι που παρακολουθούσε από το βάθος της αίθουσας. Όμως κανείς δεν φανταζόταν ότι εκείνο το αόρατο παιδί που μάζευε κουτάκια θα έλυνε το πρόβλημα μπροστά σε ολόκληρη την ακαδημαϊκή ελίτ. Αυτό που συμβαίνει στη συνέχεια αποκαλύπτει μια άβολη αλήθεια. Το ταλέντο δεν έχει κοινωνική τάξη, χρειάζεται απλώς μια ευκαιρία για να λάμψει. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this is going to be the best story you'll ever hear. The sun hadn't fully risen when Gabriel opened his eyes under the bakery awning on a busy Manhattan street. The pre-dawn chill of New York City seeped into his bones through the torn shirt and dirty pants he'd been wearing for weeks. He was 12 years old, but his eyes carried the weight of a lifetime of abandonment. At 10, Gabriel lost everything. First, it was his mother, who passed away suddenly, leaving a void impossible to fill. 6 months later, his father, shattered by grief, was also gone, unable to bear the absence of the woman he loved. Gabriel was left alone in their simple house in Queens until the few relatives he had left him to fend for himself. No one wanted the responsibility of another mouth to feed. Since then, the streets of New York had become his home. The big city, with its towering skyscrapers and bustling avenues, hid thousands of stories like his. Stories of invisible children who slept, where they could and ate when they were lucky. Gabriel quickly learned the rules of urban survival. He learned to identify the best spots for collecting cans, the times when restaurants threw out still edible food, the awnings that offered the most protection from the icy wind. But Gabriel carried something that set him apart from other street kids. From a very young age, he had shown an extraordinary intellectual capacity. At 5, he taught himself to read by looking at street signs, billboards, and newspapers he found in the trash. By 7, he was already solving complex math problems he saw in discarded school notebooks. His mother, when she was still alive, used to say he had a special gift. A gift the world would one day discover. Gabriel's memory worked differently. Everything he saw or read was etched into his mind, like a perfect photograph. He could recall entire pages of books he had read only once, mathematical formulas he had studied in abandoned science journals, philosophical concepts he had absorbed from old newspapers. It was a rare photographic memory, so powerful it would astound any expert. But who would look at a barefoot, dirty boy and imagine that? Inside that head was a universe of knowledge. Society didn't see Gabriel. People passed him by as if he were part of the urban landscape, just another social problem they preferred to ignore. Sometimes, someone would toss a coin in his direction. Other times, he received looks of disgust or pity. But no one ever stopped to truly see him. No one asked his name, his story, his dreams. Gabriel was invisible. That June morning, Gabriel got up from the awning and began his daily routine. First, he needed to find water to wash his face. Then he would head to Morningside Heights, to the campus of Columbia University. There he found his real treasure. It wasn't just the cans he collected around the campus, it was the knowledge. In the university's trash bins, Gabriel discovered a whole world of possibilities. Old books that students discarded, outdated scientific journals, handouts from various courses, academic papers. All of it fed his hungry mind. While other street kids looked for food, Gabriel also looked for knowledge. And he devoured every word, every equation, every concept with a veracity that only someone starved for learning could understand. In recent months, Gabriel had become particularly interested in a complex subject. He had found a damaged book on pharmacokinetics in the trash, a field of pharmacy that studies how drugs behave in the human body. The book was torn, with several pages missing, but Gabriel absorbed everything he could read. The mathematical equations describing the absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination of drugs in the body fascinated him. He would spend hours mentally reviewing the formulas, correcting errors he found, and imagining practical applications. It was incredible how his mind worked. Even without ever having set foot in a classroom on the subject, Gabriel understood concepts that pharmacy students took years to master. As he walked up Fifth Avenue toward the university, Gabriel thought about the equations he had studied the night before. His mind was always working, always processing information, always seeking connections between different concepts. He didn't need paper or a calculator. Everything happened inside his head with stunning mathematical precision. The walk to the university took almost 2 hours, but Gabriel didn't mind. Along the way, he observed everything: the signs on pharmacies, the ads for medications, people's conversations. Everything was learning material. Everything fed the brilliant mind that fate had placed in a fragile, battered body. When he arrived at the Columbia campus, it was already past 8 in the morning. The campus was bustling. Students carrying heavy backpacks, hurried professors, groundskeepers tending to the gardens. Gabriel knew this environment well. He spent almost every day there collecting cans, gathering recyclables, and observing the academic world from a distance. Sometimes he managed to slip into an empty lecture hall and read what was written on the whiteboards. Other times, he would sit on the outdoor benches and listen to students discussing their research. It was like living in 2 parallel worlds. During the day, Gabriel was the invisible can collector, but in his mind he was an avid student, absorbing all the knowledge he could find. That morning, however, something was different on campus. There was an unusual amount of activity around the main auditorium of the College of Pharmaceutical Sciences. Colorful banners announced an important scientific symposium that would be happening throughout the day. Gabriel approached curiously, reading the posters that talked about advanced research in drug development, clinical pharmacokinetics, and toxicology. His heart raced. This was exactly the kind of event he would love to attend. But he knew he wouldn't be allowed in. A street kid had no place at a scientific symposium. Gabriel decided to go into the auditorium anyway. It was still early, before the event officially started. He figured he could take the opportunity to collect some cans that had surely been left behind during the setup. Besides, he wanted to get a look at the materials that would be distributed. Maybe he could grab a handout, an informational pamphlet. The auditorium was empty when Gabriel slipped in silently. The chairs were all lined up. The stage was set with a projector and a microphone, and at the back was a massive whiteboard. Gabriel walked between the rows looking for recyclables, but his gaze was captured by something that made him stop in his tracks. On the whiteboard, someone had written an extremely complex mathematical equation. It was a multi-compartment pharmacokinetic equation, describing the distribution of a drug throughout the body over time. Gabriel recognized it immediately. It was related to the book he had found months ago. His eyes scanned every symbol, every integral, every variable. Something was wrong. He felt it instantly. The equation had errors, small omissions, misplaced variables, integrals that didn't resolve correctly. Gabriel moved closer to the board, mesmerized. His mind was already working on the correction, rearranging the terms, adjusting the constants, recalculating the integrals. He forgot where he was, forgot the hunger gnawing at his stomach, forgot the cold seeping into his bones. In that moment, there was only him and the equation. For the first time in a long time, Gabriel felt something he had forgotten existed. A sense of belonging. There, in front of that complex equation, he wasn't a street kid. He was a mathematician, a scientist, someone capable of understanding and solving problems that most people couldn't even begin to comprehend. His hands trembled as he looked at the board, imagining what it would be like to pick up that marker and correct the mistakes. To show the world that he existed, that he had value, that his brilliant mind deserved to be recognized. But reality snapped him back when he heard voices approaching the auditorium. Gabriel quickly moved away from the board and found a less visible corner. He knew he shouldn't be there. He knew he would be kicked out if he was discovered. But he couldn't leave. He wanted to see who would solve that equation. He wanted to know if anyone would notice the errors he had identified. The auditorium doors opened, and the first attendees of the symposium began to arrive. They were professors, researchers, and graduate students, all well-dressed, carrying leather briefcases, conversing about their research in sophisticated technical language. Gabriel watched everything from his discreet corner, trying to go unnoticed. For a moment, it worked. People came in, greeted each other, and found their seats. No one paid any attention to the dirty, barefoot boy in the back of the auditorium. But then, one of the event organizers, a man in a grey suit and gold-rimmed glasses, noticed Gabriel's presence. His face twisted into an expression of disgust and indignation. The man walked quickly toward Gabriel, his firm steps echoing through the filling auditorium. He didn't need to say anything. His glare said it all. Gabriel was an intruder, someone who didn't belong in this environment of knowledge and science. The organizer made a sharp gesture with his hand, pointing to the door. "Get out, now." Gabriel felt the weight of humiliation crash down on his shoulders, that familiar feeling of rejection, of being treated as less than human. He lowered his head and started walking toward the exit, while some of the attendees glanced at the scene with indifference. Just another street kid being put in his place. Nothing new. But before Gabriel reached the door, something happened that would change everything. A man entered the auditorium with a presence that immediately commanded the room. Tall, with perfectly coiffed grey hair, wearing an impeccable Italian suit, and a watch that probably cost more than most people made in a year. It was Dr. Reginald Thompson, a billionaire pharmaceutical executive and an honorary professor at the university. He was known not only for his fortune, but also for his sharp intellect and, above all, his arrogance. Reginald Thompson loved to demonstrate his intellectual superiority whenever he had the chance. And that day, he had prepared something special for the symposium. Reginald walked onto the stage before the event had even officially begun. He loved making dramatic entrances, ensuring all eyes were on him. With a smug smile, he pointed to the equation on the board and announced in a loud voice for everyone to hear. He was offering a reward of $1 million to anyone who could solve that equation right there during the symposium, without consulting anything, using only pure knowledge. The audience murmured in surprise. $1 million was an absurd amount, but Reginald Thompson had enough money to make that kind of bet without blinking. His goal was clear. He wanted to show that he was the smartest man in the room, that no one would be able to solve his challenge. It was a public display of ego. Reginald's gaze swept across the auditorium, savoring the attention, when his eyes fell on Gabriel still standing near the door about to leave. A look of cruel amusement crossed the executive's face. He pointed directly at the barefoot dirty boy, and with a sarcastic tone that made the audience laugh, he declared that anyone could try to solve the equation, even that can collector in the back. Laughter echoed through the auditorium. Some people turned to look at Gabriel, amused by the joke. Others didn't even bother, considering the situation too irrelevant to warrant their attention. Gabriel felt his blood boil. This man didn't know him. He knew nothing about him. He had no idea what existed inside that head. To Dr. Reginald Thompson, Gabriel was just a nuisance, a joke, a perfect example of the distance between the privileged and the excluded. But something inside Gabriel refused to accept this humiliation. Something deep, something that had lain dormant during his 2 years on the streets, woke up in that moment. It was his mother's voice telling him he had a special gift. It was the memory of his own intelligence, so brilliant and powerful, yet hidden beneath dirty clothes and bare feet. It was the outrage against a world that judged people by their appearance, not by what they carried inside. Gabriel stopped. He turned slowly to face Dr. Reginald Thompson, and then, in a voice that surprised even himself with its firmness, he accepted the challenge. "I'll solve the equation," Gabriel said. The auditorium fell into absolute silence for a moment. Then, the laughter started again, even louder this time. Some attendees commented among themselves, finding the absurd situation hilarious. A street kid with no formal education wanted to solve an equation that even the PhDs present didn't feel confident enough to attempt. Reginald Thompson's smile grew wider, delighted by the unexpected entertainment. He made a theatrical gesture, inviting Gabriel to the stage. Come on, young man. Show us what you're made of." The irony in his voice was palpable. He expected nothing more than further humiliation for the boy. Gabriel walked slowly down the central aisle of the auditorium. Every step was an act of courage. Every stare he felt was an additional weight on his shoulders. But he didn't stop. He kept walking until he reached the stage, climbed the steps, and stood face to face with the enormous whiteboard. The organizer who had tried to kick him out now watched the scene with a mixture of discomfort and morbid curiosity. Reginald Thompson crossed his arms, waiting for the show of incompetence that was surely about to begin. Gabriel looked at the equation on the board. He took a deep breath. He wiped his hand on his dirty shirt, an unconscious gesture of wanting to present himself better, to reclaim a bit of the dignity that had been stripped from him. Then he picked up the marker. His hands were no longer shaking. Inside his mind, everything was perfectly clear. The equation unfolded in layers of understanding, each variable finding its place, each integral resolving itself naturally. Gabriel began to write, not chaotically or desperately, but methodically organized, showing every step of his reasoning. First, he identified the errors he had noticed in the original equation. He pointed out omissions in the volume of distribution variables, corrected the renal elimination coefficients, and reorganized the integrals that describe the drug's absorption over time. The audience began to stir. The laughter had given way to whispers of confusion. Some people leaned forward, trying to follow what Gabriel was writing. A pharmacokinetics professor in the third row put on his glasses and adjusted them, not believing what he was seeing. This boy wasn't just guessing numbers randomly. He was demonstrating a deep and sophisticated understanding of the subject. Gabriel continued writing, explaining each concept out loud. His voice, initially timid, gained strength as he delved into the mathematics. He spoke about multi-compartment models, about first-order versus zero-order kinetics, about clearance and plasma half-life. Technical terms he had learned on his own, from books found in the trash, but which now flowed from his mouth with impressive ease. The board filled up with auxiliary equations, explanatory graphs, and elegant mathematical proofs. Reginald Thompson was no longer smiling. His face had become a mask of disbelief. He approached the board, looking intently at what Gabriel was writing. He tried to find errors, inconsistencies, anything to prove that this was just a fluke, but he found nothing. On the contrary, the solution was not only correct, but brilliant. Gabriel was using sophisticated mathematical shortcuts, simplification methods that not even Reginald, with all his expensive and prestigious academic training, had considered. The barefoot boy was giving a masterclass in advanced pharmacokinetics to an audience of PhDs. When Gabriel finally finished, placing the final period on the last equation, the auditorium was in total silence. No one was laughing anymore. No one was commenting. Everyone was processing what they had just witnessed. A man stood up slowly from the front row. It was Professor Michael Anderson, a national authority on pharmacokinetics, author of several books on the subject, respected throughout the country. He walked onto the stage with measured steps, approached the board, and began to analyze the solution in silence. His eyes scanned every line, every calculation, every deduction. The entire room held its breath, waiting for the expert's verdict. Professor Anderson turned to the audience, and his voice echoed through the auditorium. It's correct. Not just correct. It's brilliant. He used an integration by parts method that I myself hadn't considered for this type of problem. The solution is flawless. A murmur of shock swept through the auditorium. People looked at each other, incredulous. How was this possible? How had a street kid with no formal education, no access to teachers or resources, solved an equation that challenged even the experts present? The answer was right there, on the board, written in Gabriel's uneven handwriting, but with perfect reasoning. Reginald Thompson was pale. His arrogance had been completely shattered in front of hundreds of witnesses. He had made the bet expecting to humiliate others, to prove his intellectual superiority. But now he was the one being humiliated by a boy society had discarded as trash. Gabriel turned to face the executive. There was no triumph in his eyes, only exhaustion and a deep sadness. He began to speak, and his voice, though quiet, carried an emotional weight that silenced the entire auditorium. Gabriel told his story, not with self-pity, but with raw honesty. He spoke of losing his parents at just 10 years old, of being abandoned by the relatives who should have protected him, of living on the streets for 2 years, collecting trash to survive, of sleeping under awnings in the freezing pre-dawn hours, of the constant hunger, of the invisibility that society imposes on the poor. But Gabriel also spoke about his mind, about how he learned to read by himself at 5, about his photographic memory, about the books and scientific journals he found in the trash and devoured with a hunger for knowledge, about how he studied pharmacokinetics, advanced mathematics, physics, philosophy, all on his own, without a teacher, without a classroom, without anything but his determination and his natural intelligence. "While you were sleeping in warm beds, I was sleeping on the cold ground," Gabriel said, his voice trembling with emotion. "While you ate 3 meals a day, I was digging through trash hoping to find something, but my mind never stopped working. My hunger for knowledge was never less than my hunger for food. And today you laughed at me. You laughed because I'm poor, because I'm dirty, because I don't have shoes on my feet. You judged my intelligence by my appearance." Tears began to stream down the faces of several people in the audience. The shame was palpable in the air. Gabriel continued, now looking directly at Reginald Thompson. "You used me as a joke today," Gabriel said. "You humiliated me in front of everyone, thinking I was inferior, but you were wrong. Intelligence has no address. Talent doesn't need a last name. Genius can be born anywhere as long as someone gives it a chance. The problem isn't that kids like me aren't smart. The problem is that no one looks at us. No one believes in us. No one gives us opportunities. You waste talent every single day because you'd rather judge by appearances. How many other Gabriels are out there, invisible, collecting trash, sleeping on the street with brilliant minds that will never be discovered? How many geniuses does America lose because they were born poor?" Gabriel's words echoed through the auditorium like thunder. Some people were now crying openly. Others had their fists clenched, moved by the raw truth they had just heard. Reginald Thompson was paralyzed. For the first time in decades, he felt small. His fortune, his status, his expensive education, none of it mattered in that moment. He had been defeated, not just intellectually, but morally. With trembling hands, Reginald took out his phone. He asked for someone in the audience to help him set up a bank account for Gabriel right then and there. An economics student offered, quickly arranging the necessary details through an app. In a matter of minutes, Gabriel had his first bank account, and then, in front of everyone, Reginald Thompson transferred $1 million. The confirmation receipt appeared on the phone screen. The promise had been kept. But the money seemed secondary at that moment. What really mattered was what that act represented: the recognition, the validation, the proof that Gabriel was not invisible. In the audience, a young journalism student named Jessica had recorded the entire scene on her phone. She was crying as she held the device with trembling hands. This wasn't just an interesting story. It was a historic moment, a perfect portrait of American inequality and the waste of talent that happened every day on the country's streets. As soon as the symposium ended, Jessica posted the video on her social media. The caption was simple but powerful. "A homeless boy just solved a pharmacokinetics equation that PhDs couldn't. He's been living on the streets for 2 years. He studies on his own with books from the trash. He has a brilliant mind. And society treats him as invisible. How many Gabriels do we lose every day?" The video went viral in a matter of hours. First, there were hundreds of shares, then thousands. Within a few hours, millions of Americans had watched that extraordinary moment. Gabriel's name started appearing on every news outlet. Newspapers, magazines, television shows. Everyone wanted to tell the story of the genius boy who lived on the streets. The national outcry was immense. People wondered how it was possible that such a brilliant child could be abandoned, invisible, collecting trash to survive. While the entire country discussed his story, Gabriel was sitting alone on a bench in a park near the university. He looked at the phone Jessica had lent him so he could see the transfer confirmation. $1 million. It was more money than he had ever imagined existed. With that amount, he could rent a place to live, buy clothes, have food every day. He could finally get off the streets. But Gabriel didn't just feel relief or happiness. He also felt an immense weight, because he knew that his story, though extraordinary, was not unique. There were thousands of other boys and girls on the streets with hidden talents, wasted potential, and dreams suffocated by poverty. And most of them would never have the luck he had. They would never be in the right place, at the right time, with the right equation. They would remain invisible forever. As the sun set over New York, Gabriel looked at the orange sky and made a silent promise. He wouldn't be just another individual success story. He would use his voice, his newfound visibility, to open doors for others, so that no talent would be wasted because of poverty. So that intelligence would be recognized regardless of address or bank account. The next morning brought a completely different reality for Gabriel. He woke up in the same old spot, under the bakery awning in Midtown, but the world around him had drastically changed. His phone, the one Jessica had lent him that he now guarded like a treasure, wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. The video had surpassed 5 million views overnight. People from all over the country were commenting, sharing, crying. The story of the genius from the streets had touched a deep nerve in American society. As Gabriel tried to process it all, a news van pulled up in front of the bakery. Someone had found out where he slept. The reporter rushed out, followed by a cameraman, and approached Gabriel with a microphone in hand. They wanted an interview. They wanted to know more about his life, his dreams, his plans. Gabriel, still dazed, agreed to talk, but he asked for just one thing, that they not focus only on him, that they also show the other boys and girls on the street who lived nearby, that they remind America that he wasn't the only hidden talent in the invisibility of poverty. The interview aired on the morning news and moved the country even more. Gabriel spoke with a maturity that was stunning for a 12-year-old. He explained that he didn't want to be treated as an exception, as an isolated case of overcoming adversity. He wanted his story to serve as a warning, a denunciation, a call for society to look at abandoned children not with pity or disgust, but with respect and opportunity. Meanwhile, the pressure on Columbia University was intensifying by the hour. Social media, human rights organizations, and social movements all demanded a response from the institution. How could a public-minded university, dedicated to knowledge and the education of citizens, allow a genius like Gabriel to live on the streets collecting trash on its own campus? The administration held an emergency meeting. The dean, Dr. Franklin Adams, was a man in his 60s, with white hair and a serious but compassionate gaze. He understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about helping Gabriel. It was about taking on a social responsibility that the university had always preached but not always practiced. By the end of the meeting, the decision was made. Columbia would offer Gabriel a full scholarship, housing in a student residence, a full meal plan, and psychological counseling. But first, he would need to complete his basic education. Gabriel had dropped out in the 5th grade when he lost his parents. The university would set up a special academic acceleration program with dedicated tutors to help him catch up. The dean made a point of making the announcement himself at a press conference that drew dozens of journalists. The university acknowledged its mistake. It acknowledged that it had failed to see the talent living literally under its nose. And it committed not only to helping Gabriel, but also to creating permanent policies to identify and support young people in vulnerable situations with academic potential. When Gabriel received the news, he was sitting on a park bench near the university, reading a physics book he had found in the trash that morning. Jessica, the journalism student who had recorded and posted the video, went to tell him in person. Gabriel listened to everything in silence, processing every word. When Jessica finished, he took a deep breath and asked a question that caught her by surprise. "What about the other kids? The other children living on the streets, what's going to happen to them?" The question hung in the air for a moment. Jessica had no answer. Gabriel continued, "If I accept this help alone, I'll become the very thing I don't want to be, an exception. A feel-good story for society to feel better about itself, while thousands of other talents continue to rot on the streets. I want to accept. But on one condition, the university has to create a permanent program. A project that goes out to the streets, to the shelters, to the inner city neighborhoods, to look for children and young people with potential, that offers real opportunities, not just handouts. That transforms the system, not just saves one person." Gabriel's words showed a rare social consciousness. This boy wasn't just thinking about himself, about his own salvation. He was thinking about the collective, about justice, about structural change. Jessica was moved. She promised to take Gabriel's condition to the dean. She promised to do everything in her power to make it happen. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in the luxurious office of his pharmaceutical company on Park Avenue, Reginald Thompson was facing his own crisis. Since the symposium, he hadn't been able to sleep properly. He couldn't concentrate on work. His mind kept returning to that moment in the auditorium, to Gabriel's face, to the words the boy had said, to the humiliation that he, Reginald, deserved to have felt but had initially tried to deny. His assistant, Patricia, a middle-aged woman who had worked with him for 15 years, entered the room carrying a stack of newspapers. They all featured Gabriel's story on the front page. Some focused on the emotional aspect of his triumph. Others offered harsh critiques of society. And some, the ones that bothered Reginald the most, analyzed his behavior at the symposium. The arrogant executive who tried to humiliate a poor child and ended up being defeated by him. The media was not kind. Reginald was being portrayed as the villain of the story, the symbol of the callous and cruel elite. Patricia placed the newspapers on the desk and looked at her boss with an expression that mixed concern and disappointment. "Dr. Thompson," she said softly, "I've worked for you for many years. I've always respected you. But what happened in that auditorium?" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Reginald knew exactly what she was saying. He had crossed a line. He had revealed a cruelty he didn't even know he possessed. "Why did I do that?" Reginald murmured, more to himself than to Patricia. "Why did I need to humiliate a poor boy to feel superior?" Patricia didn't answer. She just waited. Reginald continued, his voice filled with something he rarely showed, genuine remorse. "I've spent my whole life building this image. The brilliant businessman, the superior intellectual, the man with all the answers. But a barefoot boy who studies with books from the trash proved that I know nothing. He proved that my arrogance is empty. And the worst part is, he was right. About everything he said. We waste talent. We judge by appearances. We are cruel to those who need help the most." The transformation beginning inside Reginald was real. It wasn't just guilt or social shame. It was a genuine awakening. For the first time in decades, he was seeing beyond his bubble of privilege. Patricia noticed the change and decided to challenge him. "If you really want to do something different," she said, "don't just sit here feeling sorry for yourself. Do something concrete. That boy is proposing to create a program to help other children. You have the resources. You have the influence. You can be part of the solution instead of continuing to be part of the problem." Patricia's words hit Reginald like a punch. She was right, completely. He picked up the phone and called the Dean of Columbia directly. The conversation was straightforward. Reginald wanted to know about the program Gabriel had proposed as a condition for accepting the university's help. He wanted to know how much it would cost. He wanted to know how he could help. The dean, initially surprised, explained that Gabriel's proposal was ambitious, to create a program for actively scouting talent with multidisciplinary teams going to the streets, shelters, and low-income communities, to offer not just spots at the university, but all the necessary support: housing, food, healthcare, psychological counseling, academic preparation. It would be expensive, very expensive, but it would be transformative. Reginald didn't hesitate. "I want to fund the project," he said. "I want to be the first major donor, and I want to do more than that. I want to be actively involved. I want to learn from this boy. I want to understand what I've been missing my whole life, locked away in my ivory tower." The dean was silent for a moment, processing this unexpected turn of events. Then he accepted. On one condition. Reginald would have to do it with humility. No spotlights, no personal marketing. Not as a charitable act to clean up his image, but as a genuine commitment to social justice. Reginald agreed. And for the first time in a long time, he felt he was doing something truly important. 2 days later, in a closed-door meeting in the dean's office, Gabriel, Dean Franklin, Reginald, Jessica, and representatives from social movements gathered to discuss the project. Gabriel entered the room in new clothes that Jessica had bought for him, but his eyes still carried that intensity, that determination that had impressed everyone at the symposium. He looked directly at Reginald. There was no anger in his gaze, just a silent demand, an expectation that this man would prove he had truly changed. The meeting lasted for hours. They discussed every detail of the project. Gabriel had clear and surprisingly mature ideas about how it should work. He didn't want a welfare program that treated poor children like victims. He wanted a program that recognized their potential, that treated them with dignity and respect, that offered rigorous intellectual challenges, not dumbed-down pity, that prepared these children to compete on equal footing with those who had always had access to expensive schools and private tutors. Reginald listened in silence, taking notes. He now realized how limited his worldview had been, how much he had missed by living isolated in his bubble of privilege, and how much he could learn if he opened his mind to different realities. By the end of the meeting, the project had taken shape. It would be called Project Genius Scout. A multidisciplinary team of social workers, psychologists, and educators would scour the streets of New York, identifying young people in vulnerable situations with extraordinary academic potential. These young people would receive full scholarships, student housing, food, healthcare, and all the support needed to develop their talents. But the project wouldn't stop there. It would also include mentorship from professionals in various fields, internships at companies, and access to state-of-the-art labs and equipment. The idea was not just to get these kids off the streets, but to prepare them to transform their own realities and, eventually, the reality of their communities. Gabriel would be the first beneficiary and also the symbol of the project. But he insisted on being actively involved in the decisions. He understood the reality of the streets in a way no one else in that room did. He knew what the real needs were, the real obstacles. His voice, therefore, was essential. Reginald committed to an initial donation of $10 million. It was a lot of money, but he had much more, and for the first time he was using his fortune for something that truly mattered. He also offered to use his influence to attract other major donors, to turn this project into a permanent, sustainable initiative, capable of surviving regardless of his personal involvement. The news of Project Genius Scout was announced at an emotional press conference. Gabriel stood at the podium alongside the Dean and Reginald. Cameras flashed frantically. Journalists shouted overlapping questions. Gabriel took the microphone and spoke with the same clarity and maturity he had shown at the symposium. "This project isn't about me," he said. "It's about all the children that society pretends not to see. It's about recognizing that talent has no address, that intelligence doesn't need a last name, that genius can be born anywhere. This project is a first step, a small but important one, because if we can show that it's possible, that it works, maybe other cities, other states, other countries will follow our example. Maybe one day we'll live in a world where no child is invisible, where no talent is wasted because of poverty." Gabriel's words moved everyone. Reginald, standing beside him, discreetly wiped away a tear. He never imagined he would be transformed by a 12-year-old boy, that he would be forced to confront his prejudices, his arrogance, his casual cruelty. But it was happening now, and he chose to embrace this transformation rather than resist it. After the press conference, Gabriel had his first official day as a resident at Columbia's student housing. Jessica made sure to accompany him. She'd become a sort of older sister to him, someone he trusted, someone who helped him navigate this new and intimidating world. The room in the residence hall was simple but clean. A bed, a desk, a closet. For Gabriel, who had spent the last 2 years sleeping on awnings and under bridges, it was a palace. He sat on the bed and for the first time in a long time allowed himself to feel the emotion he had suppressed. Tears streamed down his face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, of gratitude, of hope. Jessica sat beside him and hugged him. "You deserve this, Gabriel," she said softly. "You always have. The problem was never you. It was the world that wasn't ready to see your light. But it is now. And you're going to shine so brightly that no one will ever be able to ignore you again." Gabriel wiped his tears and smiled. It was a small, still shy but genuine smile. For the first time in 2 years, he felt that maybe there was a future, that maybe his dreams weren't just impossible fantasies, that maybe he really could make a difference. The first few months at the university were challenging. Gabriel had to adapt to a completely different routine: regular classes, fixed schedules, living with other students. He started in an academic acceleration program, studying subjects he should have learned during the years he spent on the streets. But his extraordinary intelligence meant he absorbed everything with astonishing speed. Professors were amazed by his capacity for comprehension. He didn't just memorize, he truly understood the concepts, made connections, and developed complex lines of reasoning. In 6 months, Gabriel had caught up on all the lost material. He was ready to start high school. But his teachers suggested something different. With the ability he showed, especially in math and science, perhaps it made sense to accelerate his academic path even further, to have him take proficiency exams, to allow him to skip grades. Gabriel thought about the proposal. He didn't want to be seen as a show-off prodigy, but he also saw no point in spending years studying things he already mastered. He accepted the challenge, he took the exams, and he passed them all with exceptional scores. At 13, Gabriel was a high school senior. At 14, he had already graduated and was preparing for college entrance exams. His choice of major was obvious: pharmacy, the field that had fascinated him since he found that damaged pharmacokinetics book in the trash, the field where he had demonstrated his genius at the symposium that changed his life. Meanwhile, Project Genius Scout was starting to show results. The outreach team had identified 15 young people in the first year, children and teenagers living on the streets or in low-income communities, with exceptional talents in various areas: math, music, literature, arts, science. Each of these young people received the same support as Gabriel, and each of them began to flourish in unique and beautiful ways. Clara, an 11-year-old girl who lived in a shelter, turned out to be a musical prodigy. She composed complex melodies in her head, having never had access to musical instruments or formal lessons. Now she was studying at a conservatory, with teachers amazed by her natural talent. Raphael, a 15-year-old who had spent years on the streets, had an extraordinary gift for languages. He had learned English on his own by listening to tourists' conversations. Now he was studying Mandarin, French, and German simultaneously, with frightening ease. Each story was unique. Each talent was special, and they were all living proof that Gabriel was right, that society wasted geniuses daily simply by not looking beyond appearances, beyond poverty, beyond marginalization. Reginald Thompson followed everything closely. He regularly visited the university, talked with the young people in the project, and participated in planning meetings. His transformation was remarkable. The arrogant executive who had taken the stage at the symposium with an air of superiority had given way to a more humble, more conscious, more human man. He began to use his influence to promote changes in his own company. He created an internship program for young people from low-income communities. He revised his hiring policies to eliminate unconscious biases. He increased investment in social projects. Patricia, his assistant, watched these changes with satisfaction. She had always known there was a better man hidden under that layer of arrogance. Gabriel had managed to reach that better man. On a sunny Saturday 2 years after the symposium, Gabriel was studying in the university library when Reginald showed up. He asked for a few minutes of his time. The two went to a bench in an outdoor garden. Reginald seemed nervous, which was unusual for someone so habitually self-assured. "Gabriel," he began, "I need to thank you. You changed my life. I know that might sound strange coming from a billionaire to a former street kid, but it's true." Gabriel looked at him with curiosity. Reginald continued, "I spent decades believing my worth was in my fortune, my intellect, my social status. I built walls around myself, walls that kept me from seeing reality, from feeling empathy, from being truly human. When you got on that stage and defeated me, you didn't just defeat my intellectual arrogance, you destroyed those walls. You forced me to look outside my bubble, and what I saw deeply shamed me." Gabriel listened in silence. Reginald had tears in his eyes now. "But you also gave me hope," he continued, "because if a 12-year-old boy who had lost everything who lived by collecting trash, could maintain his humanity, his generosity, his desire to help others, then maybe I could become a better person too. And I'm trying, Gabriel. Every day. Maybe I'll never be able to fully repair the harm I did with my indifference over the years, but I'm trying to do things differently from now on. Gabriel placed a hand on Reginald's shoulder in a gesture that was surprisingly mature for his 14 years. "Dr. Thompson," he said, "I never wanted to humiliate you that day. I just wanted to be seen. I wanted to prove that I existed, that I had value. You gave me that opportunity, even if unintentionally. And what you're doing now with the project, with the changes in your company, with your own transformation, that's worth more than any apology." The two men, separated by decades of age and worlds of experience, shared a moment of mutual understanding. There, on that bench in the university garden, an unlikely friendship was beginning to form. A friendship based on mutual respect, shared growth, and a commitment to social justice. In the following months, Gabriel prepared intensely for his college entrance exams. He knew he was capable of passing, but he wanted more than that. He wanted an exceptional score. He wanted to prove, not to others but to himself, that he was ready for this next step. When the results came out, Gabriel had achieved the highest score for the pharmacy program. At 15, he would be the youngest student to ever enroll in the course in the university's history. The news once again captured national attention. Gabriel, the genius from the streets, was continuing his impressive journey. But now he was no longer alone. He had an unlikely family around him: Jessica, who had become a sister; Reginald, who had become a mentor; the other young people from Project Genius Scout, who were his fellow travelers; and thousands of Americans who followed his story and cheered for his success. The first day of pharmacy school was emotional. Gabriel entered the lecture hall and sat in one of the front rows. He looked around and saw young people of 18, 19, 20, all older than him. Some looked at him with curiosity, others with skepticism. Was this famous kid really that capable, or was it just media hype? Gabriel didn't care about their doubts. He knew his work would speak for itself, and it did. In the first few weeks, it became clear to everyone that Gabriel was not just a media sensation. He was genuinely brilliant. His contributions in class were always profound and well-reasoned. His assignments were flawless. His understanding of the concepts went far beyond the superficial. Professors began to treat him not as a child prodigy, but as a respectable intellectual peer. Classmates who were initially skeptical became admirers and friends. Gabriel was finally where he had always belonged, in a learning environment surrounded by knowledge, developing his potential. The years on the street had left scars. He still had occasional nightmares. He still felt a tightness in his chest when he saw children sleeping on the streets. He still carried a deep sadness for the injustice he witnessed daily. But now he had tools to deal with it. Regular therapy, emotional support, a network of people who cared about him. And above all, he had a purpose. He knew his story could inspire change, that his voice could be used to denounce injustice, that his example could open doors for others. As his sophomore year of college approached, Gabriel began to think about how he could expand the impact of Project Genius Scout. The project was working well in New York, but what about the rest of the country? How many talents were being wasted in other cities, other states? He began to articulate a proposal to nationalize the program. It would be ambitious, expensive, complex, but possible, if they could get the right partners, the proper funding, the necessary political support. Gabriel was determined to make it happen. His journey was just beginning. 3 years had passed since that transformative day at the symposium. Gabriel was now 16 and in the middle of his pharmacy program. His routine was intense, divided between classes, labs, research, and his work as a spokesperson for Project Genius Scout. The fragile, barefoot child had become a determined, articulate young man, increasingly aware of the power his story held. But the weight of that responsibility was sometimes overwhelming. On a rainy August afternoon, Gabriel was in his dorm room, preparing a presentation for a social work conference. He had been invited to speak about the impact of Project Genius Scout and his vision for expanding the initiative nationwide. As he reviewed the slides on the laptop, the University had provided. He felt that familiar anxiety tighten his chest. Even after years off the streets, a part of him still carried that invisible boy no one wanted to see. The phone rang. It was Jessica. She was now working as a journalist for a major magazine and remained a constant presence in Gabriel's life. The two had developed a deep, almost fraternal connection. She could read his silences, sense when he was overwhelmed, and offer support in difficult times. "Hey, bro," Jessica said in the affectionate tone she always used with him. "How are you doing?" Gabriel sighed. "I'm okay. Just a little nervous about the conference next week." Jessica laughed softly. "You've spoken to audiences of thousands, Gabriel. You've been interviewed by the biggest journalists in the country. What's different this time?" Gabriel was silent for a moment before answering. "This time I'm proposing something big, really big. I'm going to ask for support from the federal government to take Project Genius Scout national. If I fail, I won't just be failing myself. I'll be failing all those invisible kids who are waiting for a chance." Jessica understood the pressure he felt. "Gabriel," she said firmly, "you've never been in this alone. You have a whole team working on the project. You have Dr. Thompson backing everything. You have the university's support. And most importantly, you have your story, which is undeniable. No one can deny the impact you've had. No one can ignore the results the project has already shown. Trust yourself." Jessica's words eased Gabriel's anxiety a bit. They talked for a few more minutes before hanging up. Gabriel returned to his presentation with renewed energy. She was right. The numbers spoke for themselves. In the last 3 years, Project Genius Scout had identified and supported 63 young people in New York, each with a unique story of overcoming adversity and talent. Clara, the girl who composed music in her head, had just won a National Composition Award. Her symphonic piece had moved the jury and the audience. Raphael, the self-taught polyglot, was working as a volunteer interpreter for refugees, using his linguistic gifts to help other marginalized people. Julian, a 14-year-old boy who lived in a shack in a rough neighborhood, had revealed himself to be a programming genius. He created complex apps, solving coding problems that experienced programmers couldn't. Now he was developing an app to connect food donors with communities in need. Each story was proof that America was wasting incredible talent simply by not looking beyond poverty. Each rescued young person was a victory against inequality. But Gabriel knew that 63 transformed lives, while significant, were a drop in the ocean. Thousands of children still lived on the streets. Thousands of talents were still invisible. More had to be done. Much more. The next day, Gabriel had a meeting with Reginald at the pharmaceutical company's office on Park Avenue. The setting was luxurious, but Gabriel had grown used to it. In recent years, he moved naturally between two completely opposite worlds: the classrooms of a major university and corporate offices, the low-income communities where the project's talents were born, and the gala events where they raised funds. Reginald greeted him with a warm hug. The executive's transformation over the past few years was impressive. He had become a fervent advocate for social justice, using his influence and resources to promote real change. His company now had robust social inclusion programs. He sat on the boards of non-profits. He spoke publicly about inequality. "Gabriel," Reginald began as soon as they sat down, "I've reviewed your proposal for nationalizing the project. It's ambitious, very ambitious." Gabriel nodded, prepared to defend every detail. Reginald smiled. "And that's exactly why it's going to work. You have my full support. More than that, I've already spoken with other executives. I've secured funding commitments that should cover at least the first 2 years of expansion." Gabriel felt a wave of relief and gratitude. "Dr. Thompson, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done." Reginald shook his head. "Gabriel, how many times do I have to ask you to stop thanking me? I'm the one who should be eternally grateful. You saved me from myself. You showed me there's life beyond ego and greed. You taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts." The two talked for hours, refining the strategy for the conference. Reginald would give Gabriel all the necessary data on costs, logistical structure, and potential partners. He would also help him anticipate and respond to the objections that would surely arise. Meanwhile, at the pharmacy school, Gabriel continued to excel academically. He was conducting undergraduate research on the pharmacokinetics of antiretroviral drugs, studying how to improve the effectiveness of HIV treatments. His advisor, Professor Henry Sampson, was a respected researcher who initially had doubts about mentoring such a young student, but Gabriel had quickly proven his worth. His analytical skills were exceptional. He read dozens of scientific articles a week, absorbing and synthesizing information with impressive speed. His hypotheses were well-founded, his experiments carefully designed. One afternoon in the lab, while analyzing chromatography data, Gabriel noticed an interesting pattern in the results, something that wasn't predicted in the existing literature. He called Professor Sampson over and showed him his observations. The professor was silent for several minutes, studying the graphs. Then, he looked at Gabriel with an expression of admiration. "Gabriel," he said, "I think you've just made a significant discovery. If these results are confirmed, they could change the way we administer these drugs." Gabriel's heart raced. He loved that feeling of being on the frontier of knowledge, discovering things no one knew before. This was what his mind was made for, to explore, to question, to discover. But even in moments of greatest academic success, Gabriel never forgot where he came from. Every week he dedicated a few hours to visiting shelters and low-income communities, talking with children and young people in vulnerable situations. He wanted them to know they had value, that they were seen, that there was hope. During one of these visits, in a community in the Bronx, Gabriel met a 10-year-old girl named Isabella. She was sitting alone in a corner, drawing in the dirt with a stick. Gabriel approached and saw that she was drawing complex geometric shapes, surprisingly sophisticated mathematical patterns. "Do you like math?" Gabriel asked, sitting next to her. Isabella looked at him suspiciously. "I don't know," she mumbled. "I've never really had classes, but I like seeing the numbers in my head. They make sense." Gabriel smiled. He remembered that feeling perfectly. "Isabella," he said softly, "you know you're special, right? You have a rare talent, and I want to help you develop it." The girl looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever recognized that she was more than just another poor kid. Gabriel took a piece of paper and a pen from his backpack. "I'm going to give you a challenge," he said. "If you can solve it, I'll get you into the Project Genius Scout program. You'll have school food, a place to live, and teachers who will teach you all about math. Deal?" Isabella's eyes lit up. She nodded eagerly. Gabriel wrote down a math problem. It wasn't easy, but it wasn't impossible for someone with natural talent. Isabella took the paper and began to study the problem. Gabriel watched her total concentration, the way her lips moved silently as she worked the numbers in her head. 15 minutes later, Isabella had the answer, and it was correct. Gabriel felt that familiar sense of discovery. Another genius hidden in the invisibility of poverty. Another life that could be transformed. Isabella became the 64th beneficiary of Project Genius Scout. When Gabriel arrived at the social work conference the following week, he was nervous but prepared. The event was held at a major convention center, bringing together public administrators, social workers, researchers, and activists from all over the country. Gabriel was the closing speaker for the second day. The room was packed when he took the stage. More than 1,000 people watched him with anticipation. Gabriel took a deep breath, looked at the audience, and began. Not with data or statistics, but with a story. His own story. He spoke about the 12-year-old boy who slept on awnings and studied with books from the trash. About the day he was humiliated in an auditorium and decided to prove his worth. About the 3 years since then, the transformed lives, the discovered talents. His voice was firm, emotional, but controlled. He had learned to use his story as a tool, not a crutch. Then he told them about Isabella, about Clara, about Raphael, about Julian, about each of the 63 young people whose lives had been changed by Project Genius Scout. The audience was in absolute silence, hanging on every word. Then Gabriel presented the numbers, the cost per youth, the success rate, the measurable social impact, the long-term returns, not just economic, but also in terms of social cohesion, crime reduction, and community development. Everything was documented, proven irrefutable. Finally, he presented the proposal to expand Project Genius Scout to every major American city over the next 2 years, to create a national network for identifying and supporting talented youth in vulnerable situations, to establish partnerships with public and private universities, with state and local governments, with companies and third sector organizations, to transform it from a local project into a national public policy. The required investment was significant, but Gabriel showed that it was feasible. He had financial commitments from executives like Reginald. He had institutional support from several universities. He had interest from various governors. All that was missing was the political coordination to make it a national priority. When he finished his presentation, the audience rose in a standing ovation. People were crying openly. Public officials came up to him asking for more information on how to implement similar programs in their cities. Journalists lined up for interviews. But the most significant moment came when a middle-aged woman approached Gabriel with tears in her eyes. She introduced herself as the Secretary of Education. She was deeply moved by the presentation. "Mr. Gabriel," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "the federal government wants to support your project. We're going to include Project Genius Scout in the next budget as a national pilot program. You would have federal resources to expand to 10 major cities in the first year." Gabriel could hardly believe it. It all felt surreal. 3 years ago, he was sleeping on awnings. Now he was talking to the Secretary of Education about national public policy. That night, back in his dorm, Gabriel called Jessica to tell her the news. She screamed with joy on the other end of the line. "Bro, you did it. You really did it." Gabriel smiled, but his voice was thoughtful. "We did it, Jessica, all of us. And this is just the beginning. There's so much more to do." In the following months, Gabriel's life became even more intense. He had to balance his college classes, his undergraduate research, the meetings to structure the national expansion of Project Genius Scout, and his responsibilities as the project's spokesperson. Sometimes he felt overwhelmed, trying to be a teenager, a student, and a social activist all at once. But then he would think of Isabella, discovering that math had a name, of Clara, composing symphonies that moved audiences, of Raphael, giving a voice to refugees. And he remembered why it all mattered. Reginald became not just a funder, but a true mentor. The two met regularly to discuss strategies, share concerns, and plan for the future. Reginald taught Gabriel about the business world, how to negotiate, how to present ideas convincingly, how to build sustainable partnerships. Gabriel taught Reginald about empathy, about seeing beyond the numbers, about always remembering that behind every statistic was a real human life. Their relationship was one of deep, mutual respect. Reginald saw in Gabriel the son he never had, someone brilliant not just intellectually but morally. Gabriel saw in Reginald proof that people can change, that it's possible to wake up to reality and choose to do things differently. One evening, while having dinner at a quiet restaurant, Reginald made a confession. "Gabriel," he said, "I was thinking about writing a book about my journey, about how a 12-year-old boy completely transformed me. Would you give me permission to tell our story?" Gabriel thought for a moment. "I'd love for you to tell it, Dr. Thompson, but not as a story about me changing you. Tell it as a story about an unjust system that allows talent to be wasted, and about how we can all choose to do things differently." Reginald smiled. "You're right, as always. That's exactly the book I'll write." As his junior year of college approached, Gabriel began to think about his future. He was loving scientific research, but he also felt increasingly drawn to social activism. Was it possible to combine the two? To do research that had a direct social impact, to develop affordable medicines for underserved populations, to use scientific knowledge as a tool for social justice? He discussed this with Professor Sampson, his advisor. The professor encouraged him to follow that path. "Gabriel," he said, "the world needs scientists who don't forget the human dimension of science, who remember that research isn't just about publications and awards, but about improving lives. You can be that kind of scientist. Meanwhile, Project Genius Scout continued to grow. With the support of the federal government, the project was implemented in 10 major cities. Hundreds of new young people were being identified, supported, and having their lives transformed. Each city developed its own identity within the project, adapting the methodology to local realities. In New Orleans, the focus was on artistic talents, with several young people being discovered as exceptional musicians, dancers, and visual artists. In Phoenix, many of the youth had deep knowledge of the desert ecosystem, ethnobotany, and ecology. In Chicago, several tech prodigies were being discovered. America was beginning to see its hidden talents, and each success story validated Gabriel's vision. Intelligence had no address. Genius could flourish anywhere. On a sunny Sunday, Gabriel visited the old spot where he used to sleep, the bakery awning in Midtown. He did this occasionally as a way to remember where he came from, to not lose connection with his history. He sat on the ground, leaned against the wall, and closed his eyes. He remembered the cold he felt, the constant hunger, the invisibility that swallowed him. But he also remembered the hope that never left him, the stubborn belief that there was something more for him, even when nothing indicated it. A street kid approached, looking at Gabriel with curiosity. The boy was about 8 years old, with dirty clothes and bare feet. Gabriel saw himself in that child. "Hey," Gabriel said softly, "what's your name?" The boy hesitated before answering. "Peter." "Hi, Peter. My name's Gabriel. Do you live around here?" Peter nodded. "I live right here, on this street." Gabriel's heart ached. "Do you go to school, Peter?" The boy shook his head. Gabriel took a deep breath. "Peter," he said, "do you believe your life can be different? That you can study, have a place to live, do what you love?" Peter looked at Gabriel with eyes that had seen too much suffering for such a young child. "I don't know," he mumbled. "No one's ever cared about me." Gabriel took a card from his wallet. It was the contact information for the Project Genius Scout team in New York. "Listen, Peter, I'm going to leave this card with you. When you're ready, when you want a chance to change your life, call this number. Tell them you're a friend of Gabriel's. They'll help you." Peter took the card with trembling hands, as if holding something precious and fragile. Gabriel stayed for a few more minutes talking to the boy, trying to plant a seed of hope in that deeply wounded heart. When he finally got up to leave, he turned back one last time. "Peter," he said, "you're not invisible. You exist. You matter. Remember that." The boy nodded, clutching the card to his chest. Gabriel walked down the street with tears in his eyes. There was still so much work to do, so many Peters waiting for a chance. But now he had tools to help. He had a voice to denounce. He had a growing movement around him. He was no longer alone in this fight. That night, Gabriel received an email from the university. It was a formal invitation to be the opening keynote speaker at the next major scientific symposium of the College of Pharmacy. The same symposium where 5 years ago his life had completely changed, the same auditorium where he had been humiliated and then triumphed. Gabriel looked at the invitation for a long time. It would be a full-circle moment, to return to the place where it all began, but now as a respected student, a promising researcher, a recognized activist. He accepted the invitation without hesitation. In the following months, as he prepared for the speech, Gabriel reflected on his journey. 5 years. It felt like a lifetime. The invisible boy who collected trash had become a 17-year-old pharmacy student, conducting scientific research and leading a national social justice movement. It was almost unbelievable. But at the same time, Gabriel felt that somehow he had always known he would get here. Not out of arrogance, but because of that stubborn faith his mother had planted in him as a child. The belief that he had a special gift, an important purpose. Jessica helped him prepare the speech. The two spent entire afternoons discussing what Gabriel should say, how to structure the presentation, what message he wanted to leave. Gabriel didn't want it to be just a personal success story. He wanted it to be a call to action, a challenge for everyone present to see beyond their bubbles of privilege. an invitation to be part of the solution. Reginald also offered help, suggesting adjustments on how to present the data from Project Genius Scout. Sharing his own perspective on transformation, he would be there on the day, in the front row, supporting Gabriel as he always did. As the day of the symposium approached, Gabriel felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. This moment would be symbolic in so many ways. It would be his chance to show those who had laughed at him 5 years ago how far he had come. But more importantly, it would be his chance to inspire a new generation to do things differently, to see the invisible, to never waste talent because of prejudice. The night before the symposium, Gabriel couldn't sleep much. He lay awake thinking about everything he had been through, all the people who had helped him, all the young people whose lives had been changed by Project Genius Scout. He thought of his mother, imagining how proud she would be if she could see him now. He thought of his father, who had given up on life when the sadness became unbearable, and wished he had found the strength to go on. When the sun rose over New York on the morning of the symposium, Gabriel was ready. He put on his best suit, the first one he had bought with his own money. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw not a fragile, scared boy, but a determined young man ready to make history. It was time to go back to that auditorium. It was time to complete the circle. It was time to show the world that talent has no address, that genius can flourish anywhere, and that when we give real opportunities to the invisible, they can change the world. Gabriel left his dorm and walked toward the College of Pharmacy. Every step was an affirmation. Every breath was a preparation. The invisible boy was about to shine once more. The auditorium was packed when Gabriel arrived. The same rows of chairs, the same imposing stage, the same whiteboard at the back. But everything felt different now. 5 years ago, he had entered as an intruder, a can collector who didn't belong in that world of knowledge. Today, he entered as the keynote speaker, awaited by hundreds of people who admired his journey. Gabriel paused for a moment at the entrance, letting the memories flood in. He remembered the complex equation he had seen on that board, the humiliation he felt when he was being kicked out, the desperate courage that made him accept Reginald's challenge, how his hands trembled as he picked up the marker, how his initially timid voice gained strength as he solved the problem. It was as if that day had happened both an eternity ago and just yesterday. Jessica appeared by his side, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Ready, bro?" she asked with her encouraging smile. Gabriel took a deep breath and nodded. More than ready. The two walked in together. The buzz in the auditorium momentarily stopped as people noticed Gabriel's arrival. Whispers spread through the audience. There he was, the genius from the streets, now a 17-year-old who had transformed not only his own life, but dozens of others as well. Gabriel walked to the front row where Reginald was already seated. The executive stood up to give him a warm hug. "How are you feeling?" Reginald asked. Gabriel smiled. "Nervous, emotional, but confident." Reginald squeezed his shoulder. "You're going to kill it, as always." In the nearby seats were other important people from Gabriel's journey. Professor Sampson, his research advisor, Dean Franklin, Patricia, Reginald's assistant who had witnessed her boss's entire transformation, and, to Gabriel's surprise and joy, several of the young people from Project Genius Scout were also there. Clara, now 14, who had become a nationally recognized composer, Raphael, the polyglot, who volunteered with refugees, Julian, the programming prodigy, Isabella, the girl who drew mathematical patterns in the dirt with sticks and was now studying at a specialized school for advanced mathematics. Seeing them all there, healthy, happy, developing their talents, was the greatest reward Gabriel could ever receive. The event organizer, the same man in the grey suit who had tried to kick Gabriel out 5 years ago, took the stage to open the event. He looked visibly uncomfortable, knowing that everyone remembered his role in that story. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with a trembling voice, "it is an extraordinary honor to welcome today as our keynote speaker, Mr. Gabriel Henrique Miller. 5 years ago, this auditorium was the stage for a moment that changed not only Gabriel's life, but also forced us to reflect on our own prejudices and on how society wastes talent due to inequality. Today, Gabriel returns not as that barefoot boy who was unjustly humiliated, but as a brilliant pharmacy student, a promising researcher, and the creator of one of the most successful social inclusion programs in the country. It is a privilege to have him with us. The audience applauded warmly. Gabriel stood up and walked to the stage. Every step down that central aisle was laden with meaning. It was the same path he had walked 5 years ago, but in the opposite direction. That time he was walking toward expulsion, toward humiliation. Today he was walking toward recognition, toward celebration. When he reached the stage, Gabriel stood in silence for a few seconds, looking out at the audience. His heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was pure emotion. Finally, he began to speak. Good afternoon, everyone. It's hard to express in words what it means to be here today. In this very auditorium 5 years ago, I was invisible. More than that, I was unwanted, a nuisance, a dirty, barefoot boy who didn't belong in a place of knowledge. Gabriel's voice was firm yet filled with emotion. He paused before continuing. I lived on the streets of New York from the age of 10 to 12. I lost my parents in a short span of time. I was abandoned by relatives who didn't want the responsibility of caring for me. I slept on awnings in the freezing pre-dawn hours. I dug through trash to find food. I was treated as less than human by a society that judges worth by appearance and bank accounts. But even on the hardest days, even when hunger ached in my stomach and the cold seeped into my bones, something inside me refused to give up. My mother, before she passed, used to say I had a special gift. And I believed her. I believed that my brilliant mind meant something, that I had a purpose. Gabriel pointed to the whiteboard behind him. On that day 5 years ago, there was a complex equation written here, a pharmacokinetics equation that challenged even the PhDs present. I recognized it because I had studied the subject on my own, from books I found in the trash. And when I was publicly humiliated, when they laughed at me, when they used me as a joke, something inside me broke. But not in a negative way. What broke was my resignation, my passive acceptance of invisibility. And in its place, courage was born. The courage to say, no, I exist, I have value, and I'm going to prove it. The audience was completely silent, hanging on his every word. Gabriel continued, his voice stronger now. I got on this stage and I solved that equation. I didn't just solve it. I demonstrated a deep understanding that surprised experts. And in that moment, I stopped being invisible. But this story isn't about me being special. The story is about how many other Gabriels are out there, invisible, wasted, ignored. How many extraordinary talents are sleeping on awnings right this very moment. How many brilliant minds are collecting trash to survive. How many child geniuses are being treated as a nuisance, simply because they were born poor. Gabriel paused to take a sip of water. His hands were shaking slightly, but it was from emotion, not nerves. In the last 5 years, I've had the privilege of rebuilding my life. This university welcomed me. It gave me an education, housing, psychological support. It treated me with dignity and respect. But I didn't want to be an exception. I didn't want to be just a feel-good story of individual success, while thousands of others remained invisible. And so Project Genius Scout was born. On the screen behind Gabriel, photos and data began to appear. Faces of smiling young people, graphs showing results, emotional testimonials. In the last 3 years, Gabriel said, Project Genius Scout has identified and supported 283 young people in situations of social vulnerability with extraordinary talents. 283 transformed lives. 283 proofs that intelligence has no address. That genius can flourish anywhere when we provide real opportunities. Gabriel began to tell individual stories. He spoke of Clara, the girl who composed symphonies in her head while living in a shelter. Of Raphael, who learned 5 languages on his own by listening to conversations on the street. Of Julian, who programmed complex apps without ever having owned a computer. Of Isabella, who drew mathematical patterns in the dirt with sticks. Each story drew tears from the audience. But Gabriel also presented data. The academic success rate of the youth supported by the project, personal development indices, the impact on their communities of origin, the social return on investment, Everything meticulously documented, scientifically validated, proving that this wasn't charity or welfare. It was social justice. It was a smart investment in the country's future. It was the recognition that wasting talent due to inequality is both a moral and an economic mistake. Gabriel then changed his tone, becoming more challenging. But I didn't come on this stage today just to celebrate what we've already achieved. I came to challenge all of you, because 283 transformed lives, while significant, are a drop in the ocean. Millions of American children still live in poverty. Thousands still sleep on the streets. Countless talents are being wasted at this very moment. And the responsibility to change that isn't just mine, it's all of ours. It belongs to every professor in this auditorium who can look beyond grades and see hidden potential. To every researcher who can use their knowledge to develop solutions that impact underserved communities. To every business leader who can create real opportunities instead of token programs. To every public official who can implement evidence-based policies instead of empty ideologies. To every citizen who can choose to see the invisible instead of walking past them as if they were part of the urban landscape. Gabriel's voice resonated through the auditorium with a force that came from deep within, from that part of him that had never given up even on the darkest days. I don't want that 5 years from now we just have a few more nice stories of individual success. I want that 5 years from now no child in America is invisible, that every talent is identified, nurtured, and developed, that poverty is no longer synonymous with a failed destiny, that we may be born into different circumstances, but we don't have to die in them, that social mobility is real, not just a political talking point. The audience erupted in applause. People stood up. Tears streamed down the faces of professors, students, and administrators. Gabriel let the applause continue for a few moments before asking for silence to conclude. I'm going to end with a sentence I wrote on the board 5 years ago, on my first day as a student at this university. Gabriel picked up a marker and wrote in large letters on the whiteboard, "Talent has no address or appearance." He turned back to the audience. This isn't just a nice phrase. It's a scientifically provable truth. It's a call to action. It's a commitment that all of us need to make, to never again judge potential by appearance, to never again waste talent because of prejudice, to build a society where every child, regardless of where they are born or how much money their parents have, can fully develop their gifts. Because when we do that, we aren't just helping individuals, we are building a better country for everyone. The applause that followed was deafening. Professors were crying openly. Students were shouting words of support. The event organizer, with tears in his eyes, came onto the stage to hug Gabriel, publicly apologizing for what he had done 5 years ago. Gabriel hugged him back, showing that he held no grudge. That too was part of the message. Transformation was possible, for individuals, for institutions, for societies. But then something unexpected happened. Reginald Thompson stood up from the front row and asked to speak. Gabriel, surprised but curious, invited him to the stage. The executive walked up slowly, his expression one of deep emotion. When he took the microphone, his voice trembled. With Gabriel's permission, I'd like to say a few words. The audience fell silent. Many there remembered Reginald's role in the story 5 years ago, the arrogant executive who had publicly humiliated a poor child. Reginald took a deep breath before he began. 5 years ago, I stood on this very stage as a completely different man. I was arrogant, cruel, and enclosed in a bubble of privilege that prevented me from seeing reality. I used that boy as a joke. I laughed at his poverty, at his appearance. I thought I was demonstrating my intellectual superiority, but what I was really demonstrating was my moral bankruptcy. Tears began to stream down Reginald's face. When Gabriel solved that equation, when he intellectually defeated me in front of everyone, I felt shame. But it wasn't a fleeting shame, it was the beginning of a profound transformation. Because Gabriel didn't just prove he was smarter than me, he proved he was more human, more generous, more courageous. A 12-year-old boy who had lost everything taught me what really matters in life. Reginald looked directly at Gabriel. Losing that bet was the best loss of my life, because it forced me to wake up, to see outside my ivory tower, to realize how much pain there is in the world, and how much of a difference I could make if I stopped being selfish. Gabriel didn't humiliate me that day. Gabriel saved me. He saved me from wasting the rest of my life as an empty man, materially rich but spiritually poor. The audience was completely moved. Even people who only knew Reginald as the billionaire executive were seeing a side of him they never imagined existed. For the last 5 years, Reginald continued, I've had the privilege of working alongside Gabriel on Project Genius Scout, of seeing the difference it makes when we choose to see the invisible, of witnessing lives being transformed. And every one of those lives transforms me too. It reminds me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts. It's in human connections, in making a difference, in leaving the world better than we found it. Reginald paused, controlling his emotion. I want to publicly apologize to Gabriel for treating him with cruelty 5 years ago, to all the young people who have benefited from the project, because my transformation doesn't bring back the years that society stole from them, and to every person in this auditorium, because I represented the worst of what the American elite can be: arrogance, indifference, casual cruelty. But I also want to say that transformation is possible, that waking up to reality is possible, that choosing to do things differently is possible, and that each of us has that power of choice every single day. The audience erupted in applause once more. Reginald turned to Gabriel, and the two embraced. It was a moment of deep reconciliation, of genuine forgiveness, of human connection transcending differences. There stood 2 men whom life had placed on opposite sides, but who had chosen to build bridges instead of walls. When the applause finally subsided, Dean Franklin asked to speak. He announced that the university was creating a permanent endowed chair for the study of inequality and wasted talent. Our research center dedicated to scientifically understanding the mechanisms that perpetuate social exclusion and to developing evidence-based interventions, and that Gabriel, as soon as he completed his degree, would be invited to join the center as a researcher. Gabriel was moved by the announcement. It was everything he had ever wanted: to combine science and social justice, to use knowledge to transform realities, to do research that truly mattered. After the official event, dozens of people surrounded Gabriel, wanting to talk, take pictures, and ask for more information about the project. Journalists requested interviews. Public officials from other cities wanted to implement similar programs. Business leaders offered funding. It was almost overwhelming, but Gabriel could see what really mattered. Every person there represented a possibility of more lives transformed, more talents discovered, more invisible people becoming visible. Later that night, Gabriel returned alone to the empty auditorium. The lights were off, the chairs unoccupied. He went up on stage one last time, looking out at where the audience had been. He remembered every important moment that space had witnessed: the humiliation, the courage, the victory, the triumphant return. It was as if his entire journey was condensed in that one place. Gabriel walked to the board and looked at the sentence he had written. Talent has no address or appearance. He picked up the marker and added another line underneath. And when we provide real opportunities, we change not just individual lives, but the entire world. In that moment, sitting alone on the empty stage, Gabriel finally allowed himself to process everything he had been through. The tears came without warning. They weren't tears of sadness, but of deep gratitude. Gratitude for having survived the hardest years. Gratitude for every person who had believed in him when no one else did. Gratitude for having found his purpose. But along with the gratitude came a renewed sense of responsibility, because Gabriel knew that his story was extraordinary, but shouldn't be rare. It shouldn't be exceptional for a smart child to be able to develop their potential. It should be the norm, the standard, the expectation. And fighting to make that a reality would be his life's work. Gabriel thought of Peter, the 8-year-old boy he had met at the same awning where he used to sleep. Had he called the number for Project Genius Scout? Was he being supported now? Gabriel made a mental note to check the next day. Because every child mattered. Every life had value. Every talent deserved to be nurtured. He looked out the auditorium window and saw the city of New York lit up at night. Somewhere out there, at that very moment, there was a boy or girl sleeping on an awning. maybe with a brilliant mind hidden under dirty clothes, maybe with dreams that seemed impossible, maybe feeling invisible. Gabriel made a silent promise to those children. I will fight for you. I will use my voice to denounce injustice. I will use my story to inspire change. I will use my knowledge to develop solutions. You are not alone. You are not invisible. I see you, and I will make the world see you too. When he finally left the auditorium, Gabriel walked through the deserted university. He passed the labs where he conducted his research, the library where he spent hours studying, the gardens where he talked with friends. Every space held memories. Every corner had witnessed a part of his transformation. Arriving at his dorm, Gabriel entered his room and lay down on his bed. He looked up at the ceiling and smiled. He was 17 years old. He was studying pharmacy at one of the best universities in the country. He was conducting promising scientific research. He was leading a national social inclusion movement. He had true friends, mentors who believed in him. A clear purpose. It was a lot. It was more than that 10-year-old boy, newly orphaned and scared, could have ever imagined. But Gabriel also knew that the journey was just beginning, that there was so much more to do, so much more to achieve, so much more to transform, and he was ready. More than ready. Because he had learned the most important lesson life can teach, that circumstances don't define destinies, that where we are born doesn't determine where we can go. That talent exists everywhere, just waiting for real opportunities, that each of us has the power to make a difference, that transformation is possible. Always. Gabriel's story was the story of an invisible boy whose light was impossible to extinguish. It was the story of an equation that revealed much more than a mathematical result. It revealed profound truths about inequality, prejudice, and wasted talent. It was the story of how an entire society was forced to confront its own failings. It was the story of individual transformations that generated collective transformations. It was the story of a stubborn hope that refused to die even on the darkest days. It was the story of a country that finally began to see its invisible people. It was the story that proved that when we give real opportunities to the marginalized, when we treat every life with dignity and respect, when we recognize that talent has no address or appearance, miracles happen. Not miracles in the supernatural sense, but profoundly human miracles, lives transformed, potentials realized, injustices corrected, futures rewritten. And it all starts with a simple but powerful choice, the choice to see, to truly see those whom society tries to make invisible, to recognize value where others see only poverty, to offer opportunities where others offer only pity, to believe when others doubt, to fight when others give up. Gabriel had made those choices. Reginald had made those choices. Jessica had made those choices. The university had made those choices. And every time someone makes those choices, the world changes a little. It becomes a little more just, a little more human, a little more like it should be. This is the story of Gabriel Henrique Miller, of the boy who was invisible but refused to disappear, of the talent that was wasted but found a way to flourish, of the voice they tried to silence but became a cry of denunciation and hope, of the future that seemed impossible but became gloriously real. And this story continues, every day, with every child identified by Project Genius Scout, with every talent discovered, with every life transformed, with every person who chooses to do things differently. The story continues. And you, who are listening now, can be a part of it. Because changing the world isn't the responsibility of one genius boy, it's the responsibility of all of us, together.